Well, we'll be happy to know that our second reading in this week is really kind of short. Look at it. It's a great one though, and it's a great sort of way to send off the course. The first paragraph, a couple of examples of people who think in terms of, you know, a global world instead of a local one. Check that out. And some things about World Trade and World Bank and all that sort of institutions that connect the world globally, right? And then there was a part of, this idea of we didn't before used to think of the world as too terribly connected and things were far away, so we didn't have to worry about it, right? For instance, they talk about oil and diamonds and timber, even to this day, right? Where I live, people say, pollution's not a big deal because it's not in our faces in North Texas, but if you lived, in certain parts of China that are very industrial or Detroit, just drive through, Detroit by where all the car plants and the refineries, and you're like, oh my gosh, or Gary, Indiana. And then you're like, good heavens, we are definitely, creating problems, but it's just, with this idea of, over there, we don't have to see it and deal with it. Same with, they talk about migration, right? Which is interesting. Right now, as we speak, there's a huge political issue in the United States about the quote unquote border, right? And the more history we have, the more we understand that mass migrations due to climate change happen all the time. And this isn't just an immigration issue in the United States. This is a huge migration issue, largely brought on by climate change. Like a lot of the people that are coming through to the United States, it's because they can't make a living anymore. A lot of that has to do with the loss of waterfall in Central and South America, and so a lot of farmers can't make it anymore. So there's these sorts of things, right? Your author talks about the Treaty of Westphalia was like the high water mark of independent sovereign state. That was in like 1648, I think, or something. And essentially, the Treaty of Westphalia was this. Europe had what was called the Holy Roman Empire. However, there was so many wars that were fought because, the empire tried to maintain religious and political sovereignty, and each kingdom wanted to do its own thing. So the aftermath of that was basically the legal enshrinement of the nation state as independent and sovereign from other nation states. What that does, in terms of global politics, is then it makes the state impervious to being accountable to principles higher than its own self, right? So in other words, it's like you can't stop a nation, another nation from doing terrible things. That's the thing. And then the next few paragraphs here, we talk about how that concept has been slowly eroding, right? So, the two world wars and stuff bring us back to the fact that we do need a United Nations, right? We do need a NATO. And then if you recall, if those of you who have been around the block a little bit like myself can probably recall in the 80s and 90s, things like NAFTA, right? North American Free Trade. All sorts of globalization was happening in the world. But what's interesting is now it seems like an accordion effect, right? For a long time, we were moving toward globalization. And now, especially with, some of the protectionist ideas of, Donald Trump and stuff and other politicians, it's like we're kind of going back to that old way of the nation state. This last paragraph, I think, is pretty good, in which he's sort of summing up history of the last few centuries as a movement toward this greater globalization when he says, the 15th and 16th centuries are celebrated for the voyages of discovery that proved the world is round, right? Boom. Far more global. All of a sudden we discovered there's a whole nother continent. The 18th century saw the proclamations of universal human rights. So 18th century, 1700s, French Revolution, American Revolution, several other, 1688, the Glorious Revolution in Britain. And there's all of these, like U.S. Constitution and Bills of Rights and Charters of Rights that are creating a universal sense. In other words, a global sense of human rights. The 20th century's conquest of space made it possible for a human being to look at our planet from a point not on it. And so to see it literally as one world, right? That's a very famous picture. Sunrise on the Moon, I think it was called, or something, that one of the Apollo missions took a picture of the Earth. And that was a compelling moment, right? Where for the first time, people are able to see the entire planet. And that has a powerful emotional impact in terms of making us think of ourselves as not Americans, not as Soviets, not as Colombians, not as Cubans, but as human beings, right? Going all the way back to the first paragraph of this article, about people talking about being citizens of the world, right? Now the 21st century faces the task of developing a suitable form of governance. It's a daunting moral and intellectual challenge, but one we cannot refuse to take up. For the future of the world truly depends on how well we mean it. And that's the thing, right? Is if you look at history as a movement towards more integration and, more globalization, and then obvious reactions against it, like we're currently seeing, in the political climate of the West, then what that tells us is, as we understand the tremendous dangers and injustices that exist in the world, we need some sort of governance. That doesn't necessarily mean Darth Vader and the Empire, right? But can we turn the UN into an actual vehicle of ethical authority or something like that? So that is the challenge. And this is what global ethics is all about. Essentially, how do we save ourselves and our planet when we are so all over the map in terms of the different things that we want? And how do you take into account nation state sovereignty when some nation states are doing things that are destroying the planet?